Welcome back once again to Viper Bytes Thursday Night Football. We've got the Rams. We've got the Seahawks. Is it sleepless in Seattle? I don't know. Is it Beverly Hills Cup? Who knows where we're going to go with this one. Anyway, we got the 3-1 Rams as a 2.5-point favorite right now going against the 2-2 Seattle Seahawks. This is going to be a fun matchup. Last season, we'll talk about this a little bit later, but the Rams won 2-1 there, including the playoff game late there with their savior. I believe it was Wolford, their quarterback, who came in relief of Jared Goff. Now, when we take a look at some of these spreads that we're dealing with, against the spread, the Rams are 2-2, 5-1. If you're looking at the last against the spread following 6 losses. So you know when it comes to this spread right now, the Rams, 2.5-point dogs right now. They've come out and they've covered that spread 5 out of 6 of their last times in which they've coming off a loss. So that's something to keep an eye on here as well as we talk about this. Now let's talk about some injuries here for the Los Angeles Rams. A couple big key injuries here. Darrell Henderson, he's got a little bit of a rib injury there. He's limited in practice on Tuesday, a little bit limited on Wednesday. We're getting geared up. I think he's going to be good to go here on Thursday Night Football. Tyler Higbee has an ankle. He was limited, as well as safety Taylor Rapp, also limited a little bit with an ankle injury. Now, we're going to get ready to the meats and potatoes here because we got a fantastic matchup. We are talking some of the top wide receivers in today's game, a couple elite passers, and you know what? Maybe some sleeper type running backs involved in this game as well. But first, let's start with the Los Angeles Rams. Their new franchise quarterback, Matt Stafford, coming over from the Detroit Lions. He is surrounded by perhaps the most talent he's ever had in his. Actually, you know what? Not perhaps. It is the most talent he's had in his career. Now, Calvin Johnson's a different beast altogether. But you know what? Collectively, from running back to the wide receiver position to the tight end position, Matt Stafford has to be happy. And the early dividends are paying off. Now, Matt Stafford is letting it rip so far from the pocket this year, more so than ever before. Through 4 weeks, he has a PFF grade of 146.8 on throws 20-plus yards down the field. Now, Stafford has 18-plus fantasy points in every game and has posted 275 yards and multiple scores in each of these first 4 games of the season. And you know what? The news gets better because, you know, the duo of Trey Lance and Jimmy Garoppolo, they put up 25-plus points, as did Kirk Cousins the week before. Now, Stafford is sitting 4th in the league in passing yards. And you know what? He's got 1,222 passing yards with a 9.1 yards per attempt, which is 5th among players with 10 attempts or more. Now, we could throw in Jordan Love. He's got some more. And Jacoby Myers and his pass. We're not going to count those type of passes right now. But 9.1 yards per attempt, which is fantastic. Throw in his 11 touchdowns to 2 interceptions. And you've got yourself an elite passer right now. And we're seeing this Rams offense just absolutely getting on board early on in the season. Now, I mentioned that PFF grade with Matt Stafford there on those 20 yards and more passes. Well, he's letting it go downfield more so than ever. He's got 6 completions, which leads the league of 40 or more yards. Now, having players like Deshaun Jackson definitely at your disposal definitely help that number out a little bit here. And clearly something to do with it. We've seen a couple big hits to Deshaun Jackson. Van Jefferson's had a couple big passes as well. So you know that the Rams want to push that ball down the field, and they're not afraid to do so. Now, at running back, we talked about Darrell Henderson coming in a little bit limited there for practice, who's got a little bit of a rib injury. Don't worry about it. We're not worried about it. He's going to be in this game. Now, Darrell Henderson made the most of his opportunities against that Cardinals defense last week that did a pretty good job at keeping that Rams passing game in check. Now, a lot has to do with Sony Michel fumbling the ball early, and that led to Darrell Henderson having a 90% snap share last week. Henderson had 14 carries in last week's loss, but did produce 89 yards on the ground and an additional 27 yards in the passing game on 5 receptions. The Seahawks are giving up league highs in rushing yards per game at 128.5 and receiving yards to running backs per game at 72.3 so far this season. So that's something to keep an eye on. I love Darrell Henderson in this matchup. I think you're going to see him involved in the passing game. I can't wait to see what the Rams are going to look like in this passing game altogether because you know they're looking to get back on track after last week's game against the Cardinals. Now, speaking of getting back on track, Cooper Kupp was finally held in check last week against that Cardinals team after posting 3 straight games of 95-plus receiving yards, as well as 3 straight games with 7-plus receptions. And He also ended a streak of 3 games in which he had, or back-to-back games in which he had multiple touchdowns. He's had 5 touchdowns this season, 1, 2, and 2. So he's putting the numbers up right now. We know those Cooper Kupp, Matt Stafford dinner dates, they're paying off early on in the season. And Stafford clearly has eyes for Cooper Kupp there. Targeted him 46 times through 4 games, while Cooper Kupp has hauled in 30 of those 46 attempts. And that's led to 431 yards receiving and 5 touchdowns. Even in a down game last week, we mentioned what Cooper Kupp kind of was held in check. He still managed to hold his spot as the number 1 running wide receiver overall, despite Tyreek Hill going off with 3 touchdowns and 186 yards last week. Cooper Kupp has 102.6 fantasy points. He's averaging 25.7 points per game early on. Now, if you're looking to get back on track, the Seattle Seahawks is a team to do it as a wide receiver. If you look at the Seahawks' past 2 games, where Deebo Samuel last week, Justin Jefferson the week before, they've combined, Jefferson and Samuel that is, have combined for 17 receptions, 274 yards, 3 touchdowns. And guess what? Cooper Kupp, you get Ugo Amadi this week. This is no contest. So Cooper Kupp, you're going to make sure you're firing him up in your lineups. He's going to look to get back on track like wide receiver ones previously have done so. Now, when you have someone like Cooper Kupp excelling, that means someone's going to take a little bit of a hit, and that's unfortunately been Robert Woods early on. He doesn't have quite the same rapport with Matt Stafford as Kupp has, but you know what? We're hoping to get that back on. We've heard McVay basically say on Monday, we just need to get him some more opportunities, and that starts with me. And you know what? Drawing Sidney Jones or the Trey Flowers, who had to grab some pine as he was benched last week, that could help Robert Woods going forward. But Woods has yet to crack 65 yards receiving through 4 games this season. Not once has he surpassed 65 yards. Now, he did manage to find the end zone kind of in garbage time last week. You've seen the disgust in Robert Woods' face when he got that. Wasn't exactly happy, wasn't celebrating that touchdown. And yes, he's got 2 touchdowns on the season, which looks good on paper. But the way this Rams offense has been clicking, you're left yearning for more from Robert Woods. In fact, he is the wide receiver 41 right now with 46 fantasy points. But he's only posted 15 receptions, 25 targets, 172 yards, and 2 touchdowns. You know what? I dare not dream what those numbers would look like if it wasn't for those touchdowns. You know what? Let's take a look at that. Okay, you know what? Pretty much he's McCole Hardman. He'd be, without those touchdowns, he'd be wide receiver 59, which is 1 spot ahead of Allen Robinson. Now, if you would have said at the beginning of the season, Robert Woods would be week 4, he'd be 1 spot ahead of Allen Robinson as far as wide receivers go, you'd probably have taken that. Except that just shows you right now that both Robert Woods and Allen Robinson have struggled early on. And those numbers don't look as good as maybe you once thought they might have been. Now, the third wide receiver option who stepped up last week was Van Jefferson. He has found success when facing cover 3 throughout his career. Jefferson has attacked it on 23% of his routes. And with this high-powered Rams offense, there are plenty of opportunities for him to make plays. Last week against the Cardinals, he stepped up with a team-high 6 receptions and 90 yards to go along with that touchdown. Jefferson has logged a 72% snap share, paired with a 15% target share over the last 2 weeks. And then we want to talk about his success against cover 3. Further to that, the effectiveness of Jefferson, he's got 6 of those 6 receptions and 90 yards last week. 48 of those yards came against cover 3, as did half of his receptions. Now, the Seahawks are giving up the 11th most fantasy points per game to wide receivers at 40.7 this season, and that's something maybe Deshaun Jackson gets involved. Then again, D-Jax, he's pretty much a best ball or a YOLO kind of guy. If you see yourself struggling in a match where you're definitely not favored to win, Deshaun Jackson may be that guy that give you some big-time points later on in the game, you know what I'm saying? As far as the tight end position goes, Tyler Higbee got back on track last week. Not really, but kind of. Well, he had a season-high 6 targets at least, and 2 of those were in the end zone. But he didn't really convert them much. He had 4 receptions for 36 yards. And after seeing a full 100% of the snaps through week 1 and week 2, he has yet to hit more than 80% of those snaps in weeks 3 and 4. Last week, the Seahawks were able to keep George Kittle as a non-factor with 4 receptions and 40 yards. That said, George Kittle has basically been a non-factor most of the season, so read into that as much as you want. Now, as far as Rams, who you're starting, who you're sitting, you're going to start up Matt Stafford there. He's kind of the middle of the pack, QB1 kind of guy right now. Cooper Kupp, he's going to get right here as well. I think Robert Woods is a wide receiver 2, a flex option. And Tyler Higbee is going to be a borderline tight end 1. And Van Jefferson, you know what? Fire him up in your flex as well, because there's definitely worse options than Van Jefferson out there. Now, the Seahawks, who I mentioned, are 2-2. They're 8-1-2 against the spread in their last 11 Thursday night contests, and they're kind of playing more closer to the unders more than anything. If you look at how it's kind of tracked out recently, but they're 2-5 against the spread in the last 7. Now, some injuries to keep in mind for the Seattle Seahawks. Chris Carson, DNP, did not practice. He's got that neck injury. I would not expect him to play at all this week. At Thursday night, I think you pretty much pencil him out. Gerald Everett looks like he's going to be good. He was on COVID there right now. DK Metcalf was limited with a little foot injury. Darrell Taylor limited with an ankle, and Carlos Dunlap limited with a toe. Don't worry about DK Metcalf either. He's going to be playing. Now, Russell Wilson is finding a way to get the ball in the end zone at an impressive 8.3% touchdown rate and an NFL best 9.6 yards per attempt through 4 weeks. We mentioned Matt Stafford at 9.1. Well, Russell Wilson's coming in at 9.6 through that same period of time. Those metrics right there add up to Russell Wilson putting up 22 or more fantasy points in 3 of the 4 contests. I don't see much changing as the Rams defense has allowed 24 or more points in 3 straight games after only allowing 5 doing this 5 times all of last season. Now, that's something that the Rams got to try and figure out with that defense. I don't think they're going to get that right with this Seattle Seahawks offense. Now, the Rams did have Wilson's number last year and may have owned him more than Sierra, but the Rams were 2-1, including that playoff win, while Wilson went 22 of 37 for 248 yards and 2 touchdowns in the first contest, 20 of 32 for 225 and 1 touchdown in the Seahawks' lone win. And in that playoff game, 11 of 27 for 174 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a crucial pick there. So we're looking at this matchup, the head-to-head. Wilson's been cooking early on in the season, but the Rams have had his number dating back to last year in those 3 contests. You're still going to look at him as a high-end QB1 here, but just temper those expectations based on those matchups last year. Now, Chris Carson / Alex Collins. I almost combined the two, call him Chris Collins. But Carson and Collins are going to be keys to watch here. We're going to keep an eye on Chris Carson close to the game time. The Seahawks are not going to rule him out until right before kickoff. I'm not expecting him to play, so you know what? Let's make sure we get Alex Collins a fair shake here this week. Now, Alex Collins, if you watched him play last week, he did very well against the 49ers. He had 10 carries. He averaged 4.4 yards per carry. He found the end zone. He also had 2 receptions for 34 yards. So that's telling me he's definitely got the potential to be a viable starter, even on Thursday Night Football, where I'm not a big fan of starting guys that you're uncertain of on Thursday Night Football, because looking at a bad score moving on the week really hurts. Now, last week, the Rams defense was giving up yards in bunches to Chase Edmonds and James Conner. Edmonds finished with 12 carries for 120 yards, including a 54-yard run. And James Conner had 18 carries for 58 yards and 2 touchdowns. Even if you take away Edmonds' big run of 54 yards, that broke the Rams defense late in that game, the Cards were still running for more than 4 yards per carry. So you can expect Alex Collins to be looking at that 4.2 to 4.4 range yards per carry. Now, will he have the touches to be effective in fantasy? That's to be seen, but we'll see how this game shakes out there. I think that's going to be a shootout here when we're looking at everything, how it breaks down. Now, DK Metcalf is quietly putting together yet again another wide receiver type season through 4 games. Currently, he's wide receiver 12, 46.5 fantasy points. And his QB, like I said, Russell, he's finding the way to get the guys the ball in the end zone. You can probably thank those 3 touchdowns in 4 games as the reason why Metcalf is inside that top 12, as his stat line is not as impressive. 20 catches, 285 yards, but those 3 touchdowns in 4 games definitely are what's helping him. Now, we look at these 4 games so far, he's put up 62 yards receiving, 53 yards receiving, 107 yards receiving, and 65 yards receiving. This kind of goes hand in hand with what we saw last year from DK Metcalf. He had a couple big boom games, a little more consistency than, say, Tyler Lockett, but nothing that really screamed at you throughout the whole season, but did just enough to end up as one of the top wide receivers for fantasy. Now, last time these 2 teams met up was in that 2020 wildcard game. Metcalf posted 26.6 fantasy points against that Rams defense, but that may be a little misconstrued because not all stats are created equally. As a healthy portion of those stats there, I think 42% basically came on 1 play. And the other 2 contests, Metcalf was basically held in the regular season to about 8.35 fantasy points per game. So the Rams did do a good job checking out DK Metcalf. And maybe that had a lot to do with Jalen Ramsey and what he was able to do physically with him. Now, Tyler Lockett, you know how I feel about Tyler Lockett. I've made no bones about it. After starting the season with back-to-back 100-yard games, 4 catches, 100 yards, 2 touchdowns against Indy, 8 catches, 178, and 1 touchdown versus Tennessee, Tyler Lockett's gone back to be Tyler Lockett. I mean that in such a way that he's going to give you some huge weeks, but he's also going to give you some real duds. That seems to be the case as teams compensate for Metcalf one week, roll coverage to Tyler Lockett the next, and kind of go back and forth. In the last 2 games combined, both the Vikings and the 49ers, he only has 8 catches on 9 targets for 55 yards. That's it. 55 yards in the last 2 contests. Looking back at last season, Lockett had 8 games with less than 55 yards receiving, 4 games in which he received between 60 and 70 yards, 4 games with 90 yards or more, and that includes the 200-yard performance against the Cardinals last year. Now, despite consistently being inconsistent, he has 20 catches this year for 333 yards and 3 touchdowns in the same 4 games, which puts him at wide receiver 9 with 51.3 fantasy points. That adds up to about 12.8 points per game. Now, Lockett operates primarily out of the slot, where Jalen Ramsey has taken 55% of his snaps. While it's unlikely that Ramsey will shadow Lockett in this contest, you need to know that there's a possibility that this will limit Lockett's ceiling somewhat. Now, saying that, the Seahawks have done a good job mixing up who's in the slot. Metcalf's played in the slot. Freddie Swain has played in the slot. Tyler Lockett's played in the slot. So the Seahawks do move their pieces around quite a bit, and they're going to have to keep him off of Jalen Ramsey for most of the game. Now, Freddie Swain, we just mentioned him here. He could be that sneaky play. I'm not recommending starting him, but through 4 games, he is Wilson's third option in the passing game with more targets than Chris Carson, Will Dissly, Gerald Everett, and Alex Collins. Now, Swain has posted 9 receptions on his 12 targets. He's got 125 yards, but he also has 2 receiving touchdowns, including one last week against San Francisco. Heck, he's even got as many 90-yard plus receiving games this season as DK Metcalf, as he went for 95 yards and a touchdown against the Titans in week 2. Now, the tight end position for the Seahawks, we got Will Dissly there, but we also got Gerald Everett. Looks like he's coming back. Now, the Rams have given up 55-plus receiving yards to tight end in each of the last 3 weeks, including a 5 for 66 and 1 touchdown stat line to Max Williams last week. Max Williams went off for 66 yards and a touchdown. Now, that's great news for Gerald Everett. Like I said, he's probably looks like he's going to be activated from that COVID list. He's on track to return to a revenge game. Gerald Everett making his way back to Seattle. Oh, boy. You know what? I have a hard time keeping guys out of my lineup during a revenge game. And I think Gerald Everett's a guy you can slide in there easy enough. I mean, you could do a lot worse. I know there's a couple leagues I'm starting some tight ends that make you go, ugh. Harrison Bryant, for one. He did have his best game of the season in week 3, catching all 5 of his targets for 54 yards. He ran 26 routes in that game. Now, when you look at what Seattle's going to do, we talked about the Rams, who you're going to start. You're going to start Russell Wilson. You got yourself a back-end QB1, a high-end QB2. Alex Collins is going to give you some flex appeal. You know what I'm saying? I think he's going to have a pretty good game. I would be shocked if he didn't end up with about 66 yards rushing and a touchdown and another 30 yards receiving. So he may be close to the 100-yard scrimmage yards when it's all said and done. DK Metcalf, you're going to start him as your wide receiver 1. Hopefully he gets you a touchdown with his 80 yards he puts up. And Tyler Lockett, I have a hard time putting him in there. You've got to play him because he has that potential every single week to be the wide receiver 1. He's also got that potential to be that wide receiver 40 or 50 and absolutely lay an egg as well. So that's what it is when you have Tyler Lockett in your lineup. You don't have that consistency. You've got the boom and bust. When the season's all said and done, he's going to be a solid wide receiver 2, possibly a low-end wide receiver 1 when you look at the stats at the end of the year. But there's going to be that consistency where it's up and down, and mostly it's going to be down for Tyler Lockett. And it's going to be interesting to see how Jalen Ramsey shadows which receiver for how long, who the Rams decide they want to make the focal point of their attention to between the 2 wide receivers, which way they're going to roll the coverage, because that's going to dictate who's going to have the bigger game. If the Rams want to take DK Metcalf out, that means Tyler Lockett has the potential to have a huge game, and vice versa. So for me, I'm taking the Rams in this game. You want my opinion on this? I'm predicting a Rams win by 10 points. I'm going to call it a 30-20. Let's call it 30-20. Rams win this game, covering, and I think we have a good chance of hitting the over here. I've got them under the over. The over set at 54.5, 30-20, kind of where I got this game sitting at. For more, make sure if you want more videos like this, we drop this down on the Vipercast on the Vipers Network every single week. I do a Thursday night football. I do a Sunday night football, a primetime football and a movie, I call it. And then we also do a Monday night football preview each and every week. And on Wednesdays, 10 p.m. Eastern, you get the Dynasty Vipers Vipercast coming at you with myself and Calvin and Tara and Major. We preview the week 5, week 6, whatever week we're on, we preview it and give you the waiver wires, bold predictions, and some pretty good analysis, if I may say so myself. That said, you want stats, you want numbers, you want the advantage on your competition, head over to fantasypoints.com, enter promo code 21Vipers10, get 10% off your subscription. And right now, through 4 games, there's actually a price cut right now that you can get it even cheaper right to the Super Bowl. So head over to fantasypoints.com, tell them Matt sent you, make sure you enter that promo code 21Vipers10, and save yourself some money and get yourself some knowledge. With that all said, this is Viper Bytes. We'll see you next time.